Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Path to Eternity, our little catechism class. I know it's been a while since we've met. I'm happy to see all of you again. To spare everyone from having to comment for the 100th time, I did get a haircut. I did trim my beard. I know I look about 10 years younger. That's okay. Sometimes, like my sermon today, we have to deal with the consequences of our actions. So that's my cross. That's my. Okay. So I'm happy that we're able to be together and to go over this again. Nektari, is there a seat for you? Is there no seat? You want to sit on somebody's lap? No, I'm just kidding. There's a chair. Okay, we'll get more chairs, or we'll start hanging people from the ceiling. I don't know.
Chris,
okay.
you guys get one? Yeah, we got one.
We're going to talk today about this. One of the things, and like I was telling Kent before, we're going over The Faith by Clark Carlton. You do not have to own this to be part of this class or to derive benefit from this class, but you can get it if you want. Then you'll know ahead of time everything I'm going to say. So the progression of this book, I think, is really nice. It's moving from the foundational dogmas of the church that God is one God in three persons, that Jesus Christ is God and man, and sort of naturally progressing to how do you live in light of that? What's incumbent on you? What does a life shaped by that belief look like? So we've covered God is one and three and one. We've covered that Jesus Christ is God and man, so on and so forth. Now we're starting to move more towards what the life in Christ is all about. And we're going to be starting today by talking about the teachings of Jesus Christ. What did Jesus Christ come to teach us? How did he live? And this is sort of obvious, I know, but it bears repeating and specifying that Jesus Christ, one of the titles that he was referred to by the people around him was rabbi, which is, just Hebrew/Aramaic for teacher. He was a teacher. That's what a disciple is. A disciple is a student. And so when we think of Jesus, obviously his work as a miracle worker and as God come to earth stands out to us, of course, because that's the most dramatic thing he did in a sense, and it confirms his teachings. But the majority of what he occupied himself with was when he was ministering was to teach. It was one of his primary goals by becoming a human being and coming to earth was to communicate a certain teaching, a certain way of life, a certain mode of being in the world. So we're going to talk about, and we've already established Jesus Christ is a perfect human being and he is God made flesh, the second person of the Trinity. Now we're going to learn a little bit more about the teaching of God made flesh, or how God wants us to live, or how we live in light of his revelation. So let's dive in. Now we know, among other things, that because of the fact that he was rejected by his people and crucified, that Jesus was a controversial teacher. And in fact, if you go through the Gospels yourself, as we're doing in our Bible study class on Tuesday night, we're going through the Gospel of Matthew, although we haven't gotten that far yet, you're going to see that very many times when Jesus preached and taught, he upset people. And people turned away from him, and people tried to kill him at times because of what he was saying out loud. So what is this? And at the same time, Jesus has a reputation as a very good ethical teacher. I mean, there's very few people on earth who would deny the fact that he was an important sage or wise man, even if they're not Christians, and that his teachings overall were good. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. These are the core of his teachings, which of course is just a summing up of the entire Old Testament law. But what was Jesus' teaching all about? Did it have a unifying theme? The answer is yes, of course it did. And the teachings of Jesus Christ, and by extension, the teachings of the church, because remember, the life of the church, the life of the Orthodox Church on earth is just the extension of the work of Jesus Christ in history. It's just to continue what Jesus was already doing on earth. The church is continuing that work in terms of preaching, in terms of teaching, in terms of healing and restoring people and restoring a right relationship with God. So the teachings of Jesus Christ, and by extension those of the church, have as their singular aim, their one and only aim, the acquisition of the kingdom of God, even at the expense of everything else. Even at the expense of everything else. There's one thing Jesus wants to do for you, and one thing he promises you. And that is that you can, by following his teachings, you can acquire the kingdom of God. He does not promise you anything else, except perhaps that you will be persecuted, except perhaps that you will be rejected, except perhaps that you will be tormented. Nothing else is promised to you by being his follower. That is a big statement. And that is part of what makes Christianity difficult and unpalatable for many. I think very many of us are in the modern United States and throughout history. It's not just a uniquely modern American problem, but I think in any Christian civilization and culture, there's a tendency to water down the teachings of Jesus, and there's a tendency to make Christianity comfortable or adjust Christianity to the whims of the time, let's say. And that's why the greatest saints of the church, who strove to live a completely authentically Christian life, were often persecuted by the authorities of the church itself, even within Orthodox countries. The greatest saints were often persecuted by the Orthodox hierarchy, and that's a difficult thing to swallow. And that's a difficult thing to swallow when I tell you that the church is perfect and that the church is the body of Christ and the church is the pillar and ground of truth. But we remember that Jesus Christ himself was killed by the legitimate religious authorities. Jesus Christ himself was killed was crucified on the command of the legitimate high priest, and none other than his own people and the own religious institution that he himself founded. But the teachings of Jesus Christ are, at their core, when they're lived to their fullest extent, extreme, totalizing. There's something that consumes your entire life and your entire being in the world, and they allow for no kind of compromise. It's really stark and austere. So we can, his command that he gave to the rich young man, for example, go, sell all that you have and give to the poor, and then come and follow me. That is a really, we are so used to hearing that, I think we've become comfortable with it. That's a really, really, really difficult thing to ask of somebody. That's a really, really, really difficult thing to command somebody. Imagine, come in. Okay. Imagine, for many of us, certainly, open the door, see who it is. So, poverty, the actual act of having nothing, and is something that certainly I cannot wrap my head around because it's not a condition I ever lived in, but is incredibly difficult thing, and to voluntarily endure that. And we're going to go into some of Jesus's other teachings, which are very stark and difficult to accept. So the first thing we're going to say about the teachings of Jesus Christ is that they are single-minded, absolutely, to the rejection of everything else in your right. Jesus says at one point in the Gospels, he who does not hate father, mother, sister, and brother for my sake and for the gospel is not worthy of me. That's a really difficult thing to say. And I remember actually the first time reading the Gospels all the way through. I'd grown up in a Christian culture, whatever, not very religious, but I grew up just in that, and I got to passages like that, and I'm like, ooh, my gosh, that's now, of course, to hate, the fathers in commenting on that say, to hate your father and mother in this context means you're going to have to reject them if they're going to be a barrier between you and Christ. You're in fact, you're obligated to be obedient to and love your parents if they're not in inhibition between you and God. But the totalizing nature of the gospel is such that if even your parents become an obstacle for you, then you have to reject even them. That's a very, very difficult thing. So the first thing is about the commandments of Jesus Christ is that they're completely single-minded and they're totalizing. They have only one objective: the kingdom of heaven at the expense of all else, and that they are totalizing in that they require a sacrifice of your entire life. They're not something you can compartmentalize and then go about your merry way without regard to them. When fully followed to their logical extent, the teachings of Jesus Christ will take all of you. And that's a beautiful and blessed thing. I'm not just trying to scare you. I know I'm just saying it in a really grim way, but it's a really beautiful and blessed thing. But I'm just trying to underscore the need to take it seriously, the need to not have a casual approach to this. And number two, what we can say is that this path that Jesus calls us to, the commandments of Christ, are unique, I think, even among historical religious traditions or ethical traditions in that they're not just about good behavior. They're not just about creating a good society or something like that. But the standard of behavior, according to the gospel, according to the teaching of Jesus Christ, is the standard of God Himself. We are called to embody the nature of to embody the characteristics of God, the Creator of everything. So in one simple example in Matthew 5:48, Jesus says, "Be therefore perfect, even as your Father who is in heaven is perfect." That is something, for example, a Muslim would not say, because Allah is something else. Allah is one thing, you're something totally different. You're just supposed to live in obedience to Him. Of course, we're supposed to live in obedience to Christ too, but that obedience is going to look like trying to be like God Himself. And again, that underscores sort of the total and radical nature of Jesus Christ's teaching. And it can lead to some things that are, difficult to wrap our heads around. Anything less than this is amartia. Anything less than total godlikeness is amartia, which is the Greek word that's translated as sin, which has its literal etymology missing the mark, a failure to hit the target. So the target is perfect godlikeness in everything that you do. Anything that's off the center is a miss. Anything that's not a bullseye is in a sense sin, and that's can be a discomforting notion. And if you read the Church Fathers, you're gonna read some discomforting things. I mean, Saint Simeon the New Theologian, who was deified, that is to say, he saw the uncreated light of God. He became one with God. He was a miracle worker. He says, anyone who fails to be deified in this life will not be saved. Wow. What's the hope for us then? I think there's a bit of hyperbole here. I don't think. That would mean that 99.9% of Orthodox Christians ever did not make it to heaven. I don't think that's what he's saying. But it is saying that the standard is extremely high. The standard that we're called to reach is very, very high. And God gives us the grace to do all things. So don't despair. Don't say, well, it's hopeless, I'm going to give up. I'm going to just run out to the bar after this and drink and have my fun. But understand that this is what the saints are thinking of. And that's why the saints, when you get to read the saints talking about themselves, I mean, these would be really holy and pure people. I'm going through the life of St. John of Kronstadt right now. Phenomenal saint. Phenomenal Russian miracle worker of the late 1800s and early 1900s. And what's really interesting about him is we have his personal diaries. So we can actually know sort of what he thought of himself or how he interacted with himself. And he's out here. He's performing these, he's doing liturgies where thousands of people would attend. He's performing these very public miracles, and that these were going around to the newspapers and stuff. It was very, very, and he himself, experienced tremendous grace from all this. And yet, in his diaries, he's talking about what a terrible sinner he is, and how far he is from God, and how unworthy he is for all these things to be happening through him. And why is that? Because the more God shows him of God's own goodness, the more God reveals His grace to him, the more sort of a microscope he has on his own life. He's not getting up to anything. He's not doing any kinds of sins. He's doing all these great things. He's giving millions of dollars of rubles to the poor every single year. He's living a pure and perfect life, but he still thinks of himself as a terrible sinner because he understands more and more clearly every day just the totally high standard that God is calling him to live in light of all the good things He's given him. So this is not a sad or joyless thing, but it is how things go. And so this is one more thing we can say about the teachings of Jesus Christ is it's not about doing a certain quantity of good deeds to balance out the bad. So if you guys ever remember your Egyptian mythology, right, when a dead soul would go down to the underworld and be judged by Anubis, I think it was a jackal-headed god, he'd weigh your soul on a balance, and if your soul was heavier than a feather because of its sins or whatever, then you'd go to hell or the underworld or whatever it is. I don't remember. So you get, basically, the idea seems to be you get a certain amount, as long as you have enough good deeds to balance out the bad, you're good. And that's really not what Christ is aiming for. And that's a conception I think many of us have of the afterlife that's really like simplistic, and it's kind of intuitive. I understand like why we would think that, but that's not really what Christ is calling us to. What Christ is not calling us that we need to do X amount of good deeds and be saved. It's about living a transformed existence. It's about entering into a certain mode of being. So Matthew 19:17 is one representative example. Jesus says, "If thou wilt enter into life, keep the commandments." If thou to keep What he's saying is that to keep the commandments, to do what he tells you to do, is not about accomplishing certain tasks, but it's about entering into life, entering into a way of existence, a way of being in the world, becoming a certain type of person, not accomplishing certain tasks. So the aim of Christianity is the aim of the teachings of Christ is to call us to a new mode of being, and we heard that in the epistle reading today as well. We're supposed to leave behind our anger, malice, wrath, our slander, our foul talk, our fornication, our impurity, so on and so forth. We all, to some greater or lesser degree, even if we were raised as Christians, we did some of that, or we were engaged in that, even if it was just in our minds, in our hearts. It's time to by being Christians, we're supposed to be putting that away. We're supposed to be entering into life. And it's a wonderful thing to enter into life, but it's the only wonderful thing. But that's what it takes. Okay. So, any questions so far about the comments, concerns? Okay. So we're going to now we're going to get into the meat of it, and we're going to go over some passages. Now, the teachings of Jesus Christ, there are a lot, and they're all over the place. And many of Jesus Christ's teachings are about himself. Especially in the Gospel of John, he very clearly elucidates who he is and his relation to the world and his desires for mankind. But very, very many of them concern our life and our sort of way to live in the world. So there are two dimensions of Jesus Christ's teaching to understand. And this is where we're going to get into the text itself, the text of the gospel. So maybe one of the biggest sections of teaching are about ethical life is the first gospel, the Gospel of Matthew. That's where the most of Jesus's ethical teachings are recorded. That's where the very famous Sermon on the Mount is. That's Matthew chapters 5-7. He's got, later on, he's got regulations about the church and so on and so forth. And that's where we hear the very famous passage at feeding the hungry, giving drink to the thirsty in Matthew 25, clothing the naked, visiting the sick and in prison, and so on and so forth. So the Gospel of Matthew is where we encounter not the only important teachings of Jesus, but maybe we can say the bulk of them. And it's also the longest of the Gospels. And so there are two things about Jesus Christ's teaching to understand. The first is that it goes beyond the letter of the law. So one of the things, just to back up and have a little bit of context, the Jews of Jesus's day, and the practitioners of the ancient Israelite religion, their life was lived around what was called the Torah, the instruction. Remember, the Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible, and it's got according to modern Jewish scholars, it's got about 613 commandments. And the whole religion, the whole religious system of that time that Jesus, the context Jesus was preaching and teaching in, the whole life was about living your life according to Torah. And we know that there was after Jesus rose from the dead and sent his disciples out into the world, there was a controversy because now non-Jews, non-Israelites were coming into the people of God, and the question was, to what degree are they meant to live according to the Torah? To what degree are they meant to live according to these 613 commandments? And we know that it was decided that the Gentiles, the non-Jews, were called not to live according to the strictness of the Torah. They didn't have to avoid eating pork, for example. They didn't have to keep very many of the dietary and clothing laws that were part of the Torah. So many of us have this impression that Jesus came to make things easier, that the Jews were very heavily burdened by the commandments of Torah, and that Jesus came to take it away and get rid of the law. It's actually more or less the opposite. Jesus came and to make Torah harder, or rather to enter into the inner dimension of Torah. Because what the Jews were preoccupied with then, with the outward observance of the law, was getting things, was make sure you do everything by the book. And what Jesus called them to is, it's not just a matter of having the right outward behavior. It's about the transformation of the inner man. It's about the it's about how obedience to these laws change your soul. So Jesus didn't get rid of these laws, but Jesus taught us to go deeper into them. And I'll give an example of what that means. To affect our inner transformation, Jesus cares very much about our inner disposition. Once you know this and you start reading the Gospels, it'll show up everywhere. Jesus cares about the inside. Jesus cares about the orientation of our heart. That's what he came to teach us. So here's an example. What he was doing was actually known as a rabbinic practice called building a fence around the law. So making the commandments actually more difficult to fulfill, so that you get the actual benefit from them. So you guys, if you want to pull out a Bible or pull one up on your phone, we can look at Matthew chapter 5. So this is and you don't have to. I can just read it to you as well, or you can do it on your phone, whatever you want. But Matthew chapter 5. I think what the copy I have here is the King James version. If you're using the Orthodox Study Bible in front of you, it's going to be the New King James version. So now Jesus is referencing the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments. And he says, "Ye have heard that it was said by them of old time, Thou shalt not kill, and whoever shall kill shall be in danger of the judgment. But I say to you, that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whosoever shall say to his brother, Raka, that's an insult, if you can't tell, shall be in danger of the council, but whosoever shall say, Thou fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. Therefore, if thou bring thy gift to the altar, and there rememberest that thy brother hath aught against thee, leave there thy gift before the altar, and go thy way. First be reconciled to thy brother, and then come and offer thy gift." So we know in the Ten Commandments, what is it? It's the sixth commandment, right? That says, "Thou shalt not kill." Jesus doesn't make that commandment easier for us, but in fact, he makes it harder by saying, not only is it wrong to kill, but to even harbor anger within yourself, to even hate somebody, or to judge somebody, or to look down or despise somebody, is to be in danger of hellfire. Wow. Well, I can say, honest to goodness, I can tell you with a clean conscience, I've never killed anyone in my entire life. I've never committed murder. But now Jesus is telling me that I think I'm in the clear. I'm not, because I've definitely harbored anger in my heart. I've definitely resented people. I've definitely been hateful and mean and petty and angry. And so he's taking the outward commandments, because the Jews at the time, the Pharisees, were only concerned if you didn't kill anyone, you're good. You're fine. Doesn't matter if you're a petty, hateful, wicked person. As long as you don't actually kill somebody, you're okay. And Jesus is saying that's not good enough. That's not good enough because you're not transformed. That's not good enough because you're not actually living a godly life. If you just allow your heart to be just a cesspit of evil. Yes, you guys had your hands up over here?
In the Old Testament, as long as you follow the letter of the law, like in your actions, it didn't matter what was going on in your heart.
It did to a degree. So the Old Testament wasn't entirely unconcerned. So the last of the Ten Commandments, it says, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his ox or his manservant, his maidservant. So the Old Testament, because it comes from the same God, it did have the beginnings of this, but Jesus fleshes it out more fully. So there's not like this total break. It's not like the Old Testament was one thing and the New Testament's totally different. It's continuity, but Jesus takes us deeper into it, is what we can say. Yes.
So when you talk about anger, I have a question. Like, what kind of, I guess, justifies like righteous anger? Like, what's kind of the difference between righteous anger and anger?
It upsets God, it upset you.
So yeah, there's a couple of layers to that, and I think that's a really important question. The first thing that must be said, because anger, God gave us the capacity for anger for a reason. There are things we're supposed to hate. There are things we're supposed to be upset about. The key thing is we're not supposed to hate people. We can hate sin. We can hate actions and sins and things, but not human beings. So when we see injustice, people being mistreated, one of the things I hate to see, and I'm going to bring this up in a sermon when I find the time, is these damn slot machines that we see in every single gas station everywhere. I mean, these are poor people sitting them, throwing their lives away, and someone somewhere, I don't know if it's the gas station owners or who brings the machine to them or whatever, is making their profit off of. They're sucking the blood out of these people. I mean, these are people who are not doing well in life. At least it doesn't appear. I've never seen someone in like a three-piece suit, pulling on one of those things, and that's wicked, man. That you should look at that and say that is wrong, and the world needs to change. But at the same time, you need to look at even the people who are instituting that wickedness and say they're children of God. They have been misguided, and they have the passions living in them, and they're being misled by the demons, and there is hope for their redemption. So direct it at the behavior. Say what you're doing is wrong. I hate what you're doing, but you have a chance at redemption. This is not easy to do. Obviously, we're sinful humans. It's very easy to get it's very hard to separate behavior from a person, but this is how we need to start thinking about it. We need to desire the salvation even of the serial killers and the all the people who do the wicked things. But we still need to look at what they're doing and say that is a terrible thing, and I'm mad about it. If that makes sense. Okay, so but definitely be reading just as much as you're able. Read like the lives and teachings of the saints, and especially recent saints, because they'll give examples of how to live this out better than a sinful, young and inexperienced priest can. Okay. But then, so leave there thy gift before the altar and go thy way. Let first be reconciled to thy brother, and then come and offer thy gift. And this is another theme that pops up again and again in Jesus' teachings, which is that religious observances don't necessarily mean anything if you are not living well. So you don't go and make sacrifices to God while you're doing bad things to other people, or you're in a fight with somebody. You have to reconcile with them. And actually, as a priest, when I serve the Divine Liturgy, that is a prerequisite. All the services books say you cannot serve as a priest. You can't go and serve the liturgy, the service we just had there, unless you're reconciled with everyone else. So I always there's the sort of mundane way it manifests itself is if my wife and I ever get in a little spat over something, I always have to before I serve the liturgy, I always have to just seal it up. I have to make sure that I come, and it always puts me in the position of just coming to ask forgiveness because I have to, it has to be over. But that's the thing. We can't just be all pious and oh, I'm in church all the time and I give all my money and so look, I make the sign of the cross the right way and I receive communion every Sunday. That's no good if your heart God doesn't want that from you. In fact, it's disgusting hypocrisy if we're like that. So the inner person has to be transformed. Okay. Another one is so we can't justify ourselves by saying I've never killed anyone. Okay, that we're still not right with God. We're still not reconciled to Him if we have anger or hatred in our heart. And by the way, all of us do. I have not been perfected yet. I still have. I'm probably better than I was a certain number of years ago, and hopefully in 5 years I'll be even better, God willing. But I'm a work in progress, and I who am teaching all of this to you. And the idea is we're making progress. We're being transformed. Yes, Raven.
And I'm going by memory here, so it's either the scripture you're reading or the parallel scriptures in the other gospels. But I believe it says that if your brother has something against you,
Mm-hmm.
to reconcile with your brother before you present your sacrifice to God at the altar. And that's not necessarily meaning that I'm mad at them. It
Yeah.
means that they're mad at me.
So I think that's a slightly different passage in Luke when he's talking about if you're being taken before the judge, make sure to do everything you can to be reconciled with your brother, if I'm recalling correctly. But yeah, the principle applies. You have to do what you can from your end. Of course, sometimes people won't forgive you, and they won't, and maybe you don't deserve forgiveness at that time. But as long as you do everything within your power to, and when it comes to serious sins, you got to work that out before coming to Holy Communion. By the way, you need to you need to work through that and talk to your priest about what your spiritual father about what's necessary to do before you can come to the chalice, because otherwise it's the Holy Communion is a life-giving fire, but it can also be a burning coal that can harm you if you're not in the right condition to receive
and
it.
Yes. That also reminds me of the morning prayers where you pray for those that hate you and wrong you,
Mm-hmm.
so that they don't die because of you.
Yeah, on account of me, the sinner. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have to be praying for and loving our enemies, which again is really hard. It emphasizes the extremeness of Christianity. I remember my last church. We had, I don't know if I've shared this before, but We had a man and a young man, young woman, husband and wife, and he converted to Orthodoxy, and she did not. And when asked, why did you not convert? Why did you not go on them special? Because Christianity is about forgiveness, and there's some people in my life I cannot forgive. While I think she's making the wrong choice, and I hope she comes around because that's a terrible way to live, I told her, and I say again, I appreciate that she took it seriously. I appreciate Jesus's command to love our enemies is a very hard thing. A lot of us have lived relatively comfortable lives. Like no one's ever killed any of my relatives. I was not abused as a child in any way. I don't have these very heavy burdens on my soul that I need to forgive people for. These are hard, and that's a huge, tremendous ask if Jesus is telling us to love our enemies and to forgive those who wrong us. And that's part of why Christianity really is difficult if you take it seriously. So it's still not the right choice, but it's you can at least sympathize and say that this is serious. Okay. In another example, in Matthew 5, 27, 28, you have heard that it said by them of old time, thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. So it's not just enough to not cheat on your wife in the flesh. You even to fantasize or to look at someone is wrong. And by the way, this is the prohibition against pornography and masturbation. There's some stupid people who say, well, the Bible doesn't say anything about pornography or masturbation. First of all, it does right here. If you're engaging anything that involves looking on someone with lust who you're not married to, that's a sin, and that's wrong, and it's a barrier between you and God. But second of all, gosh, even if that stuff's evil, it's just bad. It'll destroy your soul. But so Jesus is making the commandments harder, not easier. Jesus is increasing the restrictions of the Torah, not decreasing them, because that's the only way you're going to be transformed. That's the only way you're going to become God-like, because God himself is pure. God does not have any anger tinged with malice. God's anger is only for our correction. God, even when God punishes us, it's in the hopes that we're going to change our ways. It's in the hopes that we wake up. It's I've said that I feel that very acutely. Now that I have small children, it's like I have to punish them. Rather frequently. But I've never at any point in that punishment ever stopped loving them. It's a matter of correcting them and getting. So in God has anger, but it's not passionate anger. We have passionate anger where we want to punish people and we want it to hurt too. But that's not God's anger. Likewise, God is pure. God does not lust after anybody. God is, and so if we're going to be called to a godlike way of existence, we can't be doing that. Okay, so these are that's one dimension of Christ's commands that goes beyond the letter of the law. It's more difficult than Torah. It's not less than difficult. Why is it? And it's because it's aimed at our inner transformation. It's not about just doing the outward observances. It's about being a different person. It's about transcending our human condition, which we can't do on our own, but we can do through His grace. And number two, it's a path of self-denial. It's a path of self-denial. So we read in Luke chapter 9, verse 23 to 26, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, but whosoever will lose his life for my sake, the same shall save it. For what is a man advantaged if he gain the whole world and lose himself or be cast away? For whosoever shall be ashamed of me and my words, of him shall the Son of Man be ashamed, when he shall come in his own glory and in his Father's and of the holy angels. Deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. A cross is an instrument of torture. A cross is a very ugly and hideous thing. A cross is painful, it's suffering, and it's prolonged, humiliating suffering. And he says, take up your cross daily if you want to follow me. Again, we become numb to these words. They don't impact us very well because we've heard them so many times before, and we're very familiar with it. And we say things like, "Oh, we all have our cross to bear," which is true, but we don't realize what a cross is. A cross is a frightening thing. It's very frightening, and it's involves self-denial. So the most basic instinct that any human being has is what we call self-love. Is what the Fathers call self-love, and that's maybe in the more modern terms you'd put it as self-preservation or survival. But you want enough. to eat and drink. You want material comfort and safety, and you want a sexual partner or whatever. These are the most basic things you want. This is self-love. And what Jesus says is the opposite. Actually, to follow him, you need to be prepared to sacrifice maybe any one of these things. Maybe having enough food and drink, maybe your safety, maybe your shelter, maybe your capacity to have sexual relations in order to follow me, if the situation demands. It's not that you just stop eating at all times for no reason, but if following Christ will require those sacrifices, he's going to expect you to make them. So this is why we fast. This is why we abstain from certain things, because if you have no discipline in your life, you become soft. I mean, we know this, right? If we've ever seen a spoiled child. How did a spoiled child become spoiled? It was because they got what they want when they wanted. And modern American adults, it's so easy to get what we want when we want. We can have, we can eat whatever we want whenever we want. We can go anywhere we want whenever we want. We have fewer restrictions on ourselves than maybe any people in history ever. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it has the capacity to make us incredibly weak. It has the capacity to make so that when the time comes to make difficult decisions, we won't be able to, because we'll be so accustomed to comfort. We'll be so accustomed to indulging our self-love that we won't be able to practice any self-denial. So Jesus again in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5:29-30, "And if thy right eye offendeth thee, pluck it out and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. If thy right hand offend thee, cut it off and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell." So you need to be. So he's not necessarily talking about literally plucking out your eye or cutting off your arm, because your arm doesn't actually cause you to sin, and your eye doesn't actually cause you to sin. But you need to be ready in order to follow him in a total way to get rid of any influence of your life that's a barrier, even if that turns out to be your parents or your close relatives. It's a very difficult thing, but it's how it is, and that's and it's necessary in many ways. Remember, I don't know, how familiar you guys are with drug and alcohol rehabilitation programs. But one of the first things you got to do to get off of drugs and alcohol is you got to cut everyone out in your life who might lead you back into drugs and alcohol. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You might love them. You might have had a great time with them. They might, be flawed people with a heart of gold. But you have to cut them out if you're going to move forward, if you're going to get rid of. Otherwise, they could be a bad influence for you. Jesus, just takes that same principle, he expands it to everything. Everything that could be a barrier between you and God, you and heaven, you have to cut it out and commend it to God. Okay, so it's a path. But this is not. I'm worried that by emphasizing this, I'm emphasizing these difficult things because I want you to take it seriously. I want you to listen and understand the actual cost of the gospel. But what I hope I'm not doing, or if I am doing, I ask you to forgive me, is that this is to communicate that this is a negative or unhappy thing. Because this is a beautiful thing. This is a blessed thing. This is the only thing worth caring about. Christ is calling us to a way of life above the human condition, above and apart from all the suffering we have to go through by being born in this fallen world, and into eternal blessed life with him. The result of doing this is surpasses anything we can imagine. He says we're going to regain 100-fold whatever we sacrifice for his sake. And that's the truth, even in this life to a degree. The goal of the commandments is not just to be harsh for harsh sake. It's not to deny yourself for the sake of self-denial. The goal of the commandments is love. Love. Jesus Christ, the main two commandments are to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. So if it's all about love, why is this sacrifice? Why is this sacrifice necessary? Well, for one thing, our love can never be pure unless our egotism is dead, unless our selfishness is dead. Oftentimes when we say we love someone, something or someone, we are saying that we love what they do for us. We love the way they make us feel. Our love for them is really an extension of our love for ourselves. Jesus' love was not like that. Jesus was a total self-abnegation, total self-denial, to the point of death on a cross. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man laid down his life for his friends. That's John 15:13. we have a lot of people talk about love in our culture and in general throughout history, and most of it is baloney. Most people, again, for most people, what they mean when they refer to love is an extension of our own self-love. We love things that can benefit us. We love things because they make us feel good. We love things because they make us feel happy. Jesus, and by extension through Jesus, the saints are the only people who have ever loved things for their own sake, have loved other human beings entirely because they're own human beings, and not for anything that they could do for them. Remember, God doesn't need anything from us. God is eternally and perfectly self-existent and self-sufficient. So by teaching us to deny ourselves, Jesus is teaching us to perfect our love, to give ourselves fully to him and to give ourselves fully to other people. So the goal of the commandments of love, in love of Jesus, is self-sacrifice. You can say the inverse of that is that love without sacrifice is not love at all. If someone says they love me, but they're not willing to do the smallest thing for me, I don't really think they love me. Now, of course, all of us have an imperfect love. When I say I love my parents, I really do love them. When I say I love my wife, I really do love them. My love is imperfect. My love is tainted by my ego. It's not that I don't have love. It's that I need to be struggling through self-denial to love my wife more by sacrificing more for her. And by giving her, if only by giving her more of my time and attention, doing more for her, for my parents, if only by putting aside my ego and being more loving and respectful to them and more attentive to their needs. So we do have love. I'm not saying that we utterly lack love or that we're utterly hopeless, but we need to become purified. We need to make our love purer and purer by following God's commandments. And we learn to follow God's commandments by denying ourselves. And oftentimes, this is why service to the poor is so important, is so central to the gospel, because this is a real physical way in which you sacrifice. When you give money to someone, by definition, you have less and they have more. Well, duh, Father Theo. But that's it. Materially, you have to sacrifice. That is part of the deal. And the early Christians sacrificed quite a bit materially. They held all things in common, and so they would, if you read the book of Acts, they sacrificed. They sold their whole properties, their houses, and gave it to the church for the church to distribute it according to. We still have that according to everyone according to their need. We still have that institution survive in monasteries in the Orthodox Church. So when someone becomes a monk or a nun in the Orthodox Church, they have to sell everything. Either they give it to the monastery or they give it to poor people or some combination thereof. But it's still very important because to love someone is not just to feel affection for them. To love someone involves some kind of action. Now, sometimes we can only show our love by giving time and attention. That's the only thing. Not everyone is in need of money, and we're not always in a position to give money. But we have to sacrifice something. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay, we're going to move on to the little packet I sent out. Does everyone have one? I might not. There are a lot of people here today, and I made too few copies probably, as always. Sorry. Okay. So the first, we're going to, go into a little bit the Fathers speak. What do the Fathers have to say about this? This is St. Nicholas Kabasilas. I believe he's a 13th or 14th century Byzantine saint. It is in our power to persevere in that love, for it is not enough to love and experience its passion, but it is necessary as well to persevere in it and to add fuel to the fire so that it may persist, for this is to abide in love. All blessedness consists in this. To abide in love is to abide in God, and for him who abides in him to possess him, for it says, "He who abideth in love abideth in God, and God abideth in him." This happens when we have love firmly fixed in the will, and arrive at that through the commandments, and keep the laws of him whom we love. It is by actions that the soul is disposed towards one habit or the other, so that men may partake of goodness or wickedness. Just so, notice, it's by actions. It's not just about feelings. It's not just about, liking someone or feeling affection towards them. It has to materialize, even if it's just by giving attention and time. Just as in the case of crafts, we acquire skills and learn them by becoming accustomed to their exercise. God's laws, which apply to human activities and determine and order them towards him alone, impart the appropriate habit to those who act rightly, which is to will that which pleases the lawgiver and to subject all our will to him alone and to will nothing apart from him. This alone is to know how to love properly, and for this reason the Savior says, "If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love." John 15:10. If then to imitate Christ is to live according to, and to live according to him is to live in Christ, this life is the effect of the will when it obeys God's purposes. Just as Christ subjected his human will to his divine will in order that he might leave us an example of the right life, so he did not refuse death on behalf of the world when it was necessary to die. But before the time came, he prayed that it might not happen, showing that he did not please himself by the things which he suffered, but as Paul said, he became obedient and went to the cross, and not as though he had one will, or one compounded out of two, but rather the agreement of two wills. And this is so beautiful and just good to remember that nothing Christ ever did, nothing that God ever commanded us is something that he did not do himself. He sacrificed himself, even though he did not want to. He did not, St. Nicholas Cavasilis, and I mean, in a sense, he wanted to, in the sense he wanted to please the Father, he wanted to save us, but it wasn't fun for him, let's say, if we can put it so callously. And he did it for you, and he did it for me. And this is the example we're following. And this is why we have to learn how to sacrifice, is because there's one who sacrificed himself for us. Okay. Now, St. Maximus the Confessor. The fear of hell trains beginners to flee from evil. The desire for the reward of good things gives to the advanced the eagerness for the practice of virtues. But the mystery of love removes the mind from all created things, causing it to be blind to all that is less than God. Only those who have become blind to all that is less than God does the Lord instruct by showing them more divine things. So this is something that's you'll read a lot of the great spiritual writers of the Orthodox Church. In terms of being a Christian, you kind of progress through these level of motivation. So on the first stage, the lowest level, which is still legitimate, by the way, it's not illegitimate. The lowest level is fear of hell. You do God's commandments because you don't want to suffer eternally. That is a good motivator, and that's fine, and God accepts that. Then the next level is the hope for divine reward. You want a good afterlife. You want to live in heaven forever. You desire that. That's good as well, and it's better than just fear of hell motivating you. But the top is love, is pure, sheer, unadulterated love. It is your desire for God and his will and your willingness to do everything for him. Some of the recent saints speak so beautifully about this. St. Porphyrios, towards the end of his life, and of course he's a great saint, he's glorified in heaven and everything. But he towards the end of his life, he has this little writing, and I'm going to, mangle it. But he says, Lord, when I stand before the judgment seat, I don't know what Christ is going to say to me. All I know is that I'm going to say, Lord, do with me whatever you will. If you wish to cast me into the deepest depths of hell, it will be good, only that I know that I am obeying your will, only that I know I'm doing what you want for me. And that is a really, powerful self-denial. And of course, by denying himself in that way, he gets glorified even more, so it's not like he's ever actually at risk for going to hell. But it's really remarkable, the mindset of the saints. St. Paisios, another recent saint, says something similar. They've reached this stage in their love for Christ that they don't even care what they get out of the relationship. They love him so totally and so completely that they just want his will to be done in all things. And of course, because of that, paradoxically, even though they say, I'm willing to go to hell, I don't care, then they just get exalted and glorified more, and they enjoy even more blessings. So it's sort of paradoxical, the spiritual life, but it's beautiful and touching, and that is self-denial. My goodness, saying you're going to be damned, even. And St. Paul said a similar thing. He said he was willing for himself to be lost as long as his people would convert.
Isn't it the climax of faith?
What?
Like, the climax of faith is to follow God so entirely that you have no questions about what we're going to do.
Yeah, exactly. That's the pinnacle is total self-denial, where you don't even think about yourself at all. It's just about him and what he wants. And that's so the lower levels of motivation are fear of hell and desire for heaven. And the top level is pure love. Okay, special study, saving humility. The goal of the Christian life is to become like God, who is the very essence of love. To do so, we must learn to love as he loves. Our whole outlook on life must change, and our will must be trained. Before we can attain the heights of divine love, we must first attain the spirit of genuine humility, which St. John Climacus calls the door to the kingdom. Anyone who has acquired knowledge of the self has come to understand the fear of the Lord, and walking up with the help of this fear, walking up with the help of this fear, he has arrived at the doorway of love. For humility is the door to the kingdom, opening up to those who come near. So humility is just humbleness. It's the destruction of the ego, of self-will and self-love, and that's what we were saying before. Is you have to, in order to have pure love, unadulterated love, the humility has to come first. Otherwise, your love's going to be poisoned a little bit, even just a little bit, by your self-love. One of the Desert Fathers defined humility as seeing oneself as being lower than all of creation. This is a radical concept for our modern society, which has raised the idea of self-esteem to almost a cultic status. Nevertheless, the attainment of such humility of spirit is essential for our salvation. Learn of me, says the Lord Jesus Christ, for I am meek and lowly in heart. Matthew 11:29. Humility is attained first of all through obedience. Obedience to God through obedience to the canons of the church and to the spiritual father or mother cuts off our self-will. As in all things, our Lord is our exemplar, for he submitted himself completely to the will of his Father. For I came down from heaven not to do mine own will, but the will of him that sent me. And again, not as I will, but as thou wilt. The second, and so obedience is very important in learning, in living a Christian life, because you're learning to do someone else's will and not your own. So it's important to be obedient to your spiritual father, your father confessor, and to do what he says. And if you're a monk or a nun, your abbot or abbess. But we can exercise it in our own lives. As our parents. In a sense, we as parents also can be obedient to our children or to our spouses within limits, right? Okay, if I let our 4-year-old run our whole household, forget it. But I can show obedience to her by putting her needs above mine and above my desires. And my wife as well. And the more you do someone else's will, the more you become humble. That's all. That was all about. And Jesus' life was defined by doing the will of his Father, by obedience. Again, but you don't obey someone in sin. That's the one thing. If someone tells you to do something which is obviously or clearly sinful, and you don't have to obey necessarily just anyone walking down the street. Who tells you to go do something. But overall, there are certain authorities in your life which it's good and necessary to be obedient to. The second method for attaining humility is the remembrance of one's own sinfulness. This is not the same as obsessing over one's sins and harboring a guilt complex. Sins that have been confessed and repented of are forgiven by God. Nevertheless, we must always be mindful of our sinfulness so that we do not become proud and begin to judge others. Our Lord warns us, "Judge not, that ye not be judged. For with what judgment ye judge, you shall be judged. And why beholdest thou the speck in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam that is in thine own eye?" So that's something I definitely notice in myself. Some of the sins some of the things I see other people do wrong and judge them for more intensely are the ones I myself have been guilty of in the past, or that I know that I'm susceptible to. And that's very common for many of us. We're hypocritical in that way. We're more sensitive to the sins we ourselves have committed when we see them in other people. And so in order to avoid judgment, I think this bad thing about that guy because he did X, Y, Z, I don't know. I need to stop and I need to think, wait a minute, didn't I do that same thing? Or would I be susceptible to do that exact same thing if I were in the same position as him? So you don't judge, you don't bless it, you don't say, oh, it's a good thing, there's no right and wrong, that's fine. But you do say, well, I'm a sinner too. I have no right to judge. I'm certainly shouldn't do that and should not encourage others to do that. But how he got there or how she got there and what led to them doing that's not my business. Okay, there's more to be said on non-judgment, but we're moving through. One of the most beautiful examples of such humility is that of St. Moses the Ethiopian, also known as St. Moses the Black. Ethiopian in the olden times was, it's people from a specific country called Ethiopia, but it was also just shorthand for anybody from sub-Saharan Africa, anyone with dark skin. Moses was the leader of a band of robbers and was possibly even a murderer. He repented of his sins, however, and became a monk in the Egyptian desert of Scetis. Because he was well respected for his holiness, the fathers of the monastery sent for him one day to help judge a brother who had fallen into a sin. Abba Moses refused to go. Compelled by the fathers to attend the meeting, he took up a jug with a hole in it, filled it with water, and went to the meeting. When the fathers saw him carrying a leaking jug, they asked him what he was doing. He replied, "My sins run out behind me, and I do not see them, and today I am going to judge the errors of another." At this, the fathers forgave the brother who had sinned and learned a lesson in Christ-like humility. It's from the saying of the Desert Fathers. Very beautiful. Yet another way to attain humility is to read the lives of the saints. When we read how the martyrs suffered torture and death for the sake of Christ, and how all the saints endured great hardships solely in order to attain the kingdom of heaven, we realize how very little we have actually done for the Lord. St. Ezekiel wrote, "True humility is also brought about by meditating daily on the achievements of our brethren, by extolling their natural superiorities and by comparing our gifts with theirs. When the intellect sees in this way how worthless we are and how far we fall short in perfection of our brethren, we will regard ourselves as dust and ashes, and not as men but as some kind of cur, more defective in every respect and lower than all men of the earth." I'm definitely experiencing that, going through the life of St. John of Kronstadt. Like I said, oh my goodness, he was an incredible person, pure inside and out, and lived his life entirely for God and for others. And to even read his diaries, to know that even in his private life, that was his entire concern. I know that as a priest, I am not like that, and that I'm very selfish. And so to be able to compare myself to that, and not to make me miserable or depressed or whatever, but just to knock me down a few pegs, and just to be, you're not all that, Father Theodore. You can go easy. It's very helpful, honestly. It's very helpful because we suffer. The more egotistical we are, the more we suffer. It feels good to be humble. It feels good to just step back and say, you know what, I'm not so great. There's a relief, actually, that comes with that. And there's a lessened burden on our souls. When man attains true humility, he no longer experiences the commandments of Christ as an eternal law that constrain his will, but rather is a found of genuine spiritual freedom welling up within him. Holy humility has this to say: "The one who loves me will not condemn someone, or pass judgment on anyone, or lord it over someone else, or show off his wisdom until he has been united with me. A man truly joined to me is no longer in bondage to the law." Elder Emilianos, who was a recent holy man and monk, said, he had reached very high levels of holiness. He talked about how when you're in that state, it's not your union with God is so close that you don't wonder about, is this God's will, or what should I do, or how should I live my life? But you live in a very organic and fluid way, just enacting the will of God in all things. I don't know. It seems very cool. Okay, finally, we'll get to the questions for reflection at the end, and then I'll answer questions, then we can go. So, what is the one thing for which the wise man strives? What's the one thing Jesus' commandments are oriented towards? The kingdom of God. You guys are going to die. Did you know that? Your life's going to be a blink of the eye. Everything you own, you're going to lose it. And people are going to forget you. Anything you accomplished on earth, no one will remember. How many people do we remember from history? The vast, vast majority of them, have just disappeared from the memory of the human race. And that's going to be us, too. That's going to be me. I got 2 generations of people remembering my name, tops. And then that's it. It's done for poor Father Theodore. There's only one thing a smart person desires, and that's the kingdom of heaven. And that's to live eternally with our Creator. And for him to remember us, because this earth is just going to swallow us up. What is the goal of following the commandment of Christ? Came into the kingdom of heaven. I don't know why those 2 questions are the same. Does man earn his salvation by following the commandments of Christ? No. But if you guys were here for Vespers last night, you were creating the conditions for God to come inside you and act within you. So you're not doing all the heavy lifting is being done by God, but by bowing down your will to Him, you are creating the conditions wherein He's going to come and act. It's in a sense you're attracting Him to you. Yes.
And again, in the morning prayers, there's a prayer that says, if we could do something about that would further us along, then the gift we would get wouldn't be a gift; it would be a duty.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. What is the relationship between the law of Moses and the commandments of Christ?
The commandments of Christ have to do with the inner, like the inner part of the law.
Yeah, exactly. So they're on a continuum. It's not that the law of Moses is one thing and the commandments of Christ are different, but the commandments of Christ are the extension of the law and Moses into our very innermost core of our being. Is it enough for us to strictly observe the letter of the law? No, it's about the inner transformation, and that's why sometimes you can go against the letter of the law. That's why sometimes you can do. Sometimes there'll be certain situations where you're called to do the opposite of what the law says. Now, don't take that too far, because some people say, "Oh, we're Christians now. We have grace, not the law, so we can do whatever we want," and that's not right. Because then people just use that as an excuse to neglect the outer behavior and the inner behavior. They just don't do anything. And
If
yeah.
you're focusing on the inner behavior, then there should be like an intense level of intuition behind when the law is to be broken, which should probably be very rarely.
God bless you. You're absolutely right. To actually successfully do that, you have to understand the law really, really well. You don't. It's not that you can ignore the law, but you have to know the law really deeply in order to accomplish what's necessary behind it. Again, some people just have this lazy view. It's like, oh, Christianity is about love. Just have love. To them means just like be polite, be nice, or something. And don't worry about anything ever. But it's not correct. Anyway. Whom does Jesus say will save his own life? So who will save his life according to Jesus?
One who loses it for his sake.
Yes, one who loses it. One who loses it for his sake will save his own life. Is there any sacrifice for the sake of the kingdom of heaven which is too great? No. We have such a myopic perspective, and I see that in myself too. There are always things I have such a hard time giving up. But heaven, eternal blessedness, glory, the presence of God filling all things. I mean, there's nothing equal to that. Not even a little equal to that. What is the relationship of love to self-denial? Right, or at least you can't have pure love without self-denial. Everyone has love of a certain kind or a certain degree, but real love, the Christ-like love, has to.
Because the ego has no place in love.
Yes, exactly. In real love, in pure love. What virtue is necessary to attain godlike love? Humility, which is pretty much the same as self-denial in many ways. It's just, yeah. Our instinct, one of our most basic instincts living in this fallen world, is to put ourselves first, and our needs and our desires first. And the whole process of following Christ's commandments is to unlearn that instinct. What three methods help us to attain humility? Obedience is one. Remembrance of sins. Repentance is like an umbrella thing. Yeah. Obedience, remembrance of sins. Sacrifice is all of this. And reading the lives of the saints. Obedience, reading the lives of the saints, and remembrance of one's sinfulness. You do these things, and you'll chip away at the stone in your heart. And there's a direct correlation between how humble of a state you're in and how much you feel and experience God. That's very much real. That's very much there. The fathers say our hearts are like stone, and we're like trying to chip them away, to break the stone and to soften them. And once we do, we know instantly what happened. Okay. Yes.
I don't have to read the lives of the saints. I've got a guy who will wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning to tell me about the lives of the saints.
You're blessed. You're a blessed man.
He will wake me up. Dad. What do you want? What's happening? What's going on? I wanted to tell you this story. This was 3 o'clock in the morning about a week and a half ago.
That's awesome. That's really good. I get woken up at 3 a.m. for much more mundane reasons. Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right. Christ our God, you are the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. You have completed the divine plan of the Father. Fill our hearts with joy and gladness now and ever into the ages of ages. Amen. God bless you guys. I'll hang out for a little longer if anyone wants to talk or has questions for me, but enjoy yourselves. Have a good day.